Welcome back. We're continuing on with week 3 with the story of Zen Master Hongren. Hongren was said to be the 5th Chinese ancestor. And reading from the Cook translation here, he meets his teacher, Daoxing, on the road. And Daoxing asks him, "What is your family name?" And Cook gives us the Chinese word so that we can understand a little bit of the wordplay that's happening in this conversation. And the master, meaning Hongren, replied, "I have a nature, but it is not an ordinary name." So suddenly we have an echo of Bodhidharma here. And then Daoxing asks, "What is its name, your nature?" And Hongren replies, "Buddha nature, Boxing." So then Daoxing insists, "Have you no name?" And the master, Hongren, answered, "Because Buddha nature is empty, I have none." So if because I am one with all things, I am non-separate from any other thing, then I cannot have a name other than Buddha nature, which is what makes that so, or the way that we describe that state of reality. And then it goes on to tell a little bit of his life story. And there's this interesting exchange in which he had met Daoxing before as a person who was a pilgrim who planted pine trees. And it's an interesting metaphor, right? Somebody who is planting seeds, planting seedlings, things that will go on beyond him. And he asked to hear the teaching from Daoxing, but Daoxing says, "You're too old. So if you come back, if you're reborn and come back, then I'll teach you." Which is a very interesting cultural view. In other cultures, there was the understanding, in Indian culture, for example, there was and is the understanding that old people would go forth. Once you are done, you had completed your family responsibilities, you had completed your contribution to society by working, then at that time, it would be a common thing to think about becoming a monastic in order to really focus the entirety of your efforts on the Dhamma. But this was not the Chinese cultural view. The Chinese cultural view was that one needed to have plenty of time in training so as to become awakened enough, fully awakened or proficient enough in the Dhamma so as to share it with others and repay that benefit of having been sustained in the monastic community all those years. So there's this story where he encounters a girl washing clothes by the river, and he asks, "May I have a lodging for the night?" And Cook feels compelled to give us a paraphrase of that phrase, of that sentence, to tell us what he thinks it means, which is, "May I temporarily borrow your womb?" And I have to say, if somebody had approached me and said, "May I stay for the night? May I have lodging for the night?" it wouldn't mean that. So I'm not sure really whether she understood it that way. But that is perhaps what he meant. So the girl replies, I'll have to ask my parents. And in Cleary's translation, it's different. In Cleary's translation, we see that Cleary says, you go ask my parents, my family. And so nonetheless, our pine planting pilgrim says, if they consent, I will go and do it. And then she assented, and finally she returned to her village. So Cleary's translation here perhaps makes a bit more sense, which is that in Cleary's translation, she says, you go ask my father and brother, and he says, if you agree, I'll go. If you agree that I can stay here if they say yes, then I'll go ask them. And so she agrees, she consents. And at some point, she returned pregnant. Apparently, according to this story, as we understand from Keizan's comments, which we'll see in just a moment, by immaculate conception. In any event, her family is very upset about that, and they drive her out of the family, and she has the child, and she leaves him in the river, presumably to die, abandons him. But he's cared for by some animal spirits for 7 days. And these animal spirits take care of him, and she sees that and thinks that he must, after all, be something special. So she takes him back. And for me, it has a tiny bit of remembrance of the biblical story of Moses, whose mother also put him in a basket in the river. Although she doesn't take him back, he ends up being taken in by an Egyptian family, even though he was not of Egyptian descent. He was Israelite descent. If I remember the story correctly, maybe others know this better. In any event, he grows up with her and they're very poor. And he's known as the nameless child. And then he has this another encounter with Daoxing in this lifetime. And Daoxing recognizes something in him and asks his mother whether he can become a monk and become his attendant. So he does at the age of 7 years old. And then there's this statement that there wasn't an hour out of the whole day when he did not do zazen, though he didn't neglect his other chores. So he was a very, very diligent practitioner. Very, very diligent practitioner. And when it was his time to die in the year 675, according to this, he said, my work is finished and I'm going to die. And he died in the meditation, sitting in meditation. And so this also becomes a part of the legends of many Chinese monks, their prediction of the time of their death. And dying in a seated posture, in a zazen posture. So if we look at Keizan Zenji's, well, one thing I want to say is this. The story of Hongren is telling us something about intention, about karma and intention, and how one's intention, one's aspiration to pursue the Dhamma goes beyond a single lifetime. That is an important aspect of practice, particularly Mahayana practice. So we know from this story that the intention is extremely valuable. And so Keizan begins his comment saying, practicing Zen and learning the way is for the sake of reaching the fundamental and clarifying the nature of mind. Mind, which Cook chooses to translate to use a capital M here, meaning giving us a pointer that the meaning is not one's individual mind, but you could say universal mind of some sort. Mind which is Buddha nature, mind which is all things. So then Keizan says, even though face after face and body after body is different, never for a moment are you lacking in completely clear knowing. So because there is the ability, because we have the ability to know our intimate lived experience, that is the ability to know the whole because of the state of non-separation. So no matter which lifetime you are in, no matter which face you have, which body you have, or which individual mind, consciousness, karmic consciousness you have, you still live within that thing that you are trying to wake up to. So it must be present at all times. So he goes on page 166, halfway down, truly this nature is not separate from me and you. It merely bears the faces of self and other. And we discriminate it like the previous and later bodies of Hongren. By not being able to clarify the mind, we become infatuated, fascinated with what we see in front of us, and divide into this body and that body. So he's talking about the way that the sense of separation is a delusion, is a mistake, is something that prevents us from clearly seeing our true nature. Or we could say, is a sign of the fact that we haven't seen our true nature. Truly, we're not prevented from seeing our true nature by anything in this way of understanding, because even delusion is also integral to the whole, is also teaching us, demonstrating Buddha nature. So then he says, even though you change forms and move from life to life, how could that possibly hinder the self or alter the mind? It is still that process, that complete arising and ceasing of phenomena that is happening. And then we get to this final paragraph before the poem on page 166 of the Cook. Body, hair, and skin are inherited from one's father and mother. Though you must understand that this body is not the five aggregates. So what does it mean to say that the body is not the five aggregates? What he's referring to again there is that the true body is all things. Because this body is not separate, then our true body is all things. Or as Dogen puts it later than Hongren, but earlier than Keizan, as Dogen had said, the true body is mountains, rivers, and the whole great earth. if you understand the body like this, in this way, this non-separate way, meaning that the true body is the whole of all existence, all phenomena, there is nothing at all besides the self. Exactly. There could be nothing outside of that. Self with a capital S, not individual self, but the self, the Buddha nature, is what this capital S self is referring to. And therefore, an ancient said, all sentient beings have eternally been immersed in the samadhi of ultimate reality. Hosho sammai. Hosho sammai. I'm not sure which ancient said that, and Cook didn't give us a note, so we don't know. You are fully immersed in it. You could not be anyplace else. There is no anyplace else. And then this lovely verse, moon bright, water pure, the autumn sky clear. How can a speck of cloud mark this immense purity? All things perfectly demonstrating the truth, the reality.